Well, one of my most vivid memories is of an August night in the late 1970s when some friends and I were camping in a meadow on Mount Assiniboine in the Canadian Rockies. We lay back on air mattresses outside the tent. We had been forewarned that something big was coming, taking in the spectacular Perseid meteor shower with no interference at all from city lights. We were dozens of miles away from the nearest town, and that wasn't a very big town. Needless to say, the shower would have forfeited much of its luster if we'd watched it from a well-lit vantage point in a city or a suburb. The last words of the dying Goethe are supposed to have been more light. I'm happy to say that Paul Bogard is alive and well, but his basic message is a variation on the great German poet's outcry, more natural light. To see what our love affair with artificial lighting causes us to miss, Bogard has traveled all over the world searching for clean views of the heavens in all their glory. He is the editor of the anthology Let There Be Light, Testimony on Behalf of the Dark, and the sole author of The End of Night, Searching for Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light. When not on the road, he teaches writing at James Madison University in Harrisburg, Virginia. Well, with the National Book Festival being held indoors this year, he will have to deal with artificial lighting and make the best of it today, but I'm sure he will. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Bogard.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see a good crowd. I was really excited to be invited to the National Book Festival and really excited to see Billy Collins, who's presenting at the exact same time I'm presenting. So I got to see him at the children's thing earlier, so that was good. The End of Night is a book of stories. I always like to make the disclaimer at the beginning that I'm not a scientist. I'm a lover of science. I'm a storyteller. I'm an English professor. And I've always loved nighttime. I grew up in Minneapolis, and we still have a cabin in the northern part of the state. And so I grew up every summer going to this cabin and walking out out onto the dock under the Milky Way, under this naturally dark, beautiful sky, and it just became a normal part of my life. And when I finally got around to learning the constellations, which was actually not until after college, I very quickly realized that I couldn't see all the constellations I was supposed to see, that we have lost so many of the constellations because of the light in the sky. And I quickly realized how important darkness was for this night sky that I'd always loved. And from there, I began to learn how important darkness is for so many reasons, for life on Earth, essentially, important to us culturally, spiritually, important to our physical health, important to the health of the ecosystems on which we rely, just so important. And so I came up with this book idea and went on a wonderful journey. The book goes from some of our brightest places, like Las Vegas, Times Square, or I'm thinking the stage is quite bright. It's ironic how often when I talk I'm facing blinding light, but all the way down to some of our darkest places, like Death Valley out west. And the path of the book starts with chapter 9 and works its way down to chapter 1. And what that does is it follows something that's called the Bortle scale. It's named after an amateur astronomer in New York State, John Bortle, who came up with this scale to rank levels of darkness because he was getting tired of younger astronomers primarily saying, "John, you have to come out and see this place we found. It's so dark." And he would get out there, and it really wasn't that dark. And he realized that these younger astronomers had never experienced real darkness, the kind of darkness that he grew up in, even in the 40s and the 50s. So it hasn't been that long ago, and I'll show a really revealing slide in a second that shows you how rapidly we've lost real darkness in this country. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the book, show you a number of images. This as you can imagine, this issue goes well with imagery. Read just a couple brief passages from the book, and then leave plenty of time for questions, because this is an issue that touches on so many aspects of our lives, and I might not say everything you'd like to hear about physical health, safety, environmental, that kind of thing, and I love to answer questions. Also, the big question always, what can we do about this? One of the reasons I love this issue is it is one that we can do something about so readily. Light pollution is in our control in the way a lot of other issues aren't. So as I said, The End of Night is a book of stories, and one of the first stories that I tell is going to Upper New York State to visit a writer named Bob Berman. Some of you may know him, a wonderful writer of astronomy. And Bob is a big, gregarious guy, fun-loving guy, enjoys writing about astronomy with a sense of humor, which he said isn't the easiest thing to do. But he said the favorite column he's ever written was a collection of all the dumb questions he's been asked over the years about astronomy. And he called this article "An F in Science." And so, of course, I said, well, what's the dumbest question you've ever been asked? And he paused and he said, well, it's hard to top. If a solar eclipse is so dangerous, why are we having it? But I also quite like, does Mars have a sun like our sun? But Bob and I got to talking about why would people ask questions like that, and we were discussing the way that so many Americans and increasingly people all around the world who are living in cities have lost a first-hand experience of the night sky and night in general, a natural night in general. And I wanted to share with Bob why I was writing the book, what inspired me. And so I told him a story about when I was 18, year after high school, and I was backpacking in Europe. And I'll read that passage to you, a brief passage from the book. The most beautiful starry night I've ever seen was more than 20 years ago when I was backpacking through Europe as an 18-year-old high school graduate. I had traveled south from Spain into Morocco, and from there south to the Atlas Mountains at the edge of the Sahara, to a place where nomadic tribes came in from the desert to barter and trade, a place that when I look on a map, I can no longer find. One night in a youth hostel that was more like a stable, I woke and walked out into a snowstorm. But it wasn't the snow I was used to in Minnesota or anywhere else I'd been. Standing bare chest a cool night, wearing flip-flops and shorts, I let a storm of stars swirl around me. I remember no light pollution. I remember no lights. But I remember the light around me, the sense of being lit by starlight, and that I could see the ground to which the stars seemed to be floating down. I saw the sky that night in 3 dimensions. The sky had depth, some stars seemingly close, some much farther away. The Milky Way so well defined, it had what astronomers call structure, that sense of its twisting depths. I remember stars from one horizon to the other, stars stranger in their numbers than the wooden cart full of severed goat heads I'd seen that morning, or the poverty of the rag-clad children that afternoon, making a night sky so plush it still seems like a dream. So much was right about that night. It was a time in my life when I was every day experiencing something new. I felt open to everything, as though I were made of clay and the world was imprinting upon me its breathtaking beauty. Standing nearly naked under that Moroccan sky, skin against the